Welcome to this deep dive, everybody. We're about to explore something that sounds like it's, well, straight out of science fiction.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
The idea that there's a hidden code, like a mathematical language, behind the way a flower looks or a tree branches.
Hmm.
We're diving into the algorithmic beauty of plants, and let me tell you, it's a fascinating read.
Oh, absolutely. This book blew my mind when I first read it. It's amazing how they connect, computer science, math, botany, all in one place.
Right. And you don't have to be a mathematician to appreciate it either.
Definitely not. They do a great job of explaining things, making it clear for everyone.
Exactly. So no worries if you're not like a coding whiz or anything.
Nope, not at all.
The book dives deep into these things called L systems.
And that's where the magic happens.
Yeah. They're like this way to model how plants grow using, get this, surprisingly simple rules.
It's incredible, really, how much complexity you can get from just a few basic instructions.
So today we're going to uncover how these rules create these stunningly realistic plant models.
Oh, yeah, and animations.
Mhm.
They even get into how you can make these virtual plants grow and move.
It's wild. And we'll even touch upon the whole fractal nature of plants.
Because, nature loves those patterns.
It really does. So the book starts by explaining these L systems, and it really emphasizes how elegant they are. Like, you start with these really simple instructions, and boom, you get all this complexity.
It's a bit like imagine a single seed, right?
Yeah.
From that tiny thing, you get this massive, intricate tree.
It's like that, exactly.
L systems capture that same kind of elegance, that ability to generate, complexity from these very basic building blocks.
So how do they actually work? I'm dying to know, because I looked at the book, and I'll be honest, I was a bit intimidated at first. It seemed pretty technical.
Yeah, it might look that way, but the core idea is pretty straightforward. Basically, you have these single letters, just like in the alphabet, like A or B, and then you have rules for how to replace those letters with strings of other letters.
Okay, so it's like a code, like a secret language for plants.
You got it. And just like our language has grammar rules, L systems have their own set of rules that dictate how those letters get swapped and combined.
So, for example, you might have a rule that says replace every A with AB and every B with A, and then you just keep applying those rules over and over.
Exactly. You iterate on them. And as you do that, as you keep applying those simple substitutions, you start to see these patterns emerge, these strings of letters that, believe it or not, can actually represent the structure of a plant.
That's so cool. So it's not just about creating these abstract patterns. Those letters are actually telling us something about how the plant is physically organized.
You got it. And the book starts with a really great example, the snowflake curve. It's a classic fractal pattern, but they break down how you can actually generate that intricate, symmetrical beauty we associate with snowflakes using a really simple L system.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this works. So we've got these letters, these basic building blocks, and then the rules tell them how to combine and grow, kind of like how a single bud on a tree can turn into this whole intricate branch.
Precisely. It mirrors that process of growth in a really elegant way. It's like those time-lapse videos where you see a plant unfurl, but instead of watching it on a screen, we're seeing the code, the instructions that make it happen.
So they've got the growth part down, but how does it translate to the actual shapes? We're not just talking about lines on a page, right? Plants are three-dimensional. They've got curves, textures.
Right. It's not just an abstract code. That's where this thing called turtle interpretation comes in. Think of it like a little robot or a turtle following these drawing instructions.
A robot turtle. Okay, I like where this is going.
So imagine each letter in our L system corresponds to a specific command for this turtle. Like F might tell it to draw a line forward, might mean turn left, could be turn right, and so on.
So those letters are literally telling the turtle how to move its pen, drawing out the plan as it goes.
You got it. It's like a little botanical artist following these precise instructions, and the drawing that emerges, that's our plant structure.
That is so cool. And it's amazing to me that something so seemingly simple, just letters and a few rules, can create something as intricate and beautiful as a plant.
Right. And it all goes back to that idea we were talking about, that elegance of nature.
But it doesn't stop there, right? We're just scratching the surface here with these basic shapes. Plants are way more intricate than that. So how do we get from these stick figure plants to, like, the real deal?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting. The book introduces this idea of adding parameters to our L systems. So instead of just saying draw a line, we can say draw a line this long or turn this specific angle.
So we're giving our robot turtle a bit more control, a bit more finesse.
Exactly. It's like going from sketching with a crayon to using a fine-tipped pen. We can add those finer details that make each plant unique.
It's like giving them their own individual personalities. And I remember the book has this great example, the row of trees, where they play around with these
Oh, yeah, I
parameters.
love that one. They
Yeah.
basically tweak the rules slightly, change some of those parameters, and suddenly, boom, you go from these abstract fractal-looking patterns to something that actually resembles like a row of trees growing in a field.
It's like they cracked the code for how nature creates that diversity.
Exactly. And that shift from those early kind of abstract patterns to something that feels much closer to the real world,
Mm.
it's a huge part of what makes this book so captivating.
Yeah. It's like they're saying, okay, we can make these cool patterns, but can we actually make them look like real trees? Like it's something you'd see out in a forest.
Right, exactly. It's that next level,
Right.
right? Because trees, they aren't perfectly symmetrical.
Right.
They're not just these like repeating patterns. They've got all this variation,
Yeah.
different branch lengths, the angles, how they respond to light, gravity, all that.
It's like every tree has its own personality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge the book tackles, you know? It shows how by adding those parameters we were talking about, like instead of just saying branch, you say branch this long or at this angle.
Right, right.
And by introducing like a touch of randomness into the mix.
Ah, so it's not all completely predetermined.
Yeah, exactly. You get these models that can actually start to mimic that natural complexity.
Right. That's amazing. So it's like giving those virtual trees their own little bit of like free will.
Yeah, in a way. It's like they have a bit more life to them. And the cool thing is the book doesn't just stop at trees.
Oh, right. It goes way beyond trees. We get those, what are they called? Herbaceous plants, right?
Exactly, the non-woody ones. And I was surprised by how much detail they go into with those models.
Yeah, it's a whole other level of complexity because it's not just about the overall shape anymore.
It's about the growth process itself, right?
Yeah.
Like, how do you model something as dynamic as a plant unfolding?
Right, because they're constantly changing, growing, adapting.
Exactly. The book uses the example of a crocus, and they break it down step by step, showing how you can simulate those leaves emerging, the stem growing, even the flower blooming. It's incredible.
It really is. It's like watching a time-lapse video, but like on a computer.
Exactly. And then there's this whole part about signals in these models.
Yeah, I was a bit confused by that at first. It's not like those virtual plants are actually like talking to each other, right?
No, no, not at all. It's more about those internal cues. Like imagine a built-in timer for the plant.
Ah, okay.
It's how the model knows, okay, now it's time to transition from making leaves to, say, producing a flower.
I see. So it's less about communication between plants and more about how each individual plant kind of knows what to do and when to do it.
Exactly. Like a choreographer telling the dancers when to move, you know?
Oh, that's a great analogy. And speaking of intricate choreography, this is where we get to one of the most visually stunning aspects of plants. The whole arrangement of leaves, petals, all that.
Ah, yes. Phalotaxis. It's one of those things you might not think about consciously, but it's everywhere in the plant world.
It's true. You only really start to see it when someone points it out, and then you're like, oh, wow, it's everywhere.
Exactly. Those spirals in a sunflower, the way pine cones are structured, it's all
No,
phalotaxis.
it's mind-blowing. And what I love is that the book, it doesn't just show us these patterns, it actually delves into the math behind it all.
Right. And it's amazing how often these complex arrangements, they boil down to things like the golden ratio and the Fibonacci sequence.
It's like nature has this secret code for creating beauty and efficiency at the same time.
Exactly. And the book does such a good job of explaining these concepts, you know, in an accessible way, showing how these mathematical principles that we often associate with these abstract ideas are actually like woven into the fabric of the natural world.
It's incredible. It's like plants are speaking this secret language of math, and this book is giving us the translation.
Right. And they even give you the formulas and steps. So if you're feeling really adventurous, you can try creating these patterns yourself.
Oh man, that's a whole other level of dedication. But it just goes to show you how powerful these tools are. It's not just about understanding plants, it's about recreating them too.
Exactly. And they don't stop at the overall structure either.
Yeah.
They take it even further, right down to the individual leaves, the petals.
Yeah, it's like, okay, we can model the whole plant, but what about all those intricate details? How do we make those look realistic?
Right. So they talk about these different techniques for creating the surfaces of those plant parts.
Yeah.
Like how do you make a virtual leaf look like it has veins or texture, or even how light reflects off of it.
It's like they're painting with algorithms. I love it.
Yeah.
And I was really intrigued by the developmental surface models. It's not enough to just create a static image. They actually figured out how to make the shape of a leaf or petal change over time. as the virtual plant grows.
Yeah, it's like watching those time-lapse videos, but on a computer.
Yeah.
And it just adds this whole other level of realism. It's amazing.
It's like these plants are actually coming to life before our eyes. And of course, speaking of bringing things to life, they don't stop at just modeling static structures. They take it even further with animation.
Of course.
Yeah.
Because if you can model the growth process, why not actually see it unfold right there on the screen?
Right, exactly. But I imagine that comes with a whole other set of challenges, right? Trying to animate something as complex as plant growth.
Oh, absolutely. You're basically trying to create this smooth, continuous process, but from a series of like discrete steps.
It's like trying to make a flip book look like a real movie.
Exactly. But they managed to pull it off. They developed these, what they call timed DOL systems. It's a mouthful.
Yeah, it sounds pretty technical.
It is, but basically it's about assigning an age to each part of the L system, which allows the animation to like flow more naturally. So you see how the plant develops over time, not just as these sudden jumps.
So it's like giving the animation that extra bit of smoothness, that sense of natural progression.
Exactly. And they even animated like the growth of a filamentous bacteria.
Wow, so we're talking microscopic level here.
Yeah. And they captured how the whole filament grows smoothly, even as the individual cells are dividing. It's incredible.
It's like watching a microscopic ballet, right? Amazing. But they don't stop at just bacteria, do they? The book, it takes us even further down the rabbit hole, like down to the level of individual cells.
It's true. It's like they took those models and put them under a microscope, And what they realized was that those earlier L systems, they worked great for the overall shape, but they weren't quite detailed enough to really capture how plant cells arrange themselves, especially when you get into those really complex structures.
So like they needed a whole new set of tools to zoom in that far.
Exactly. That's where those MAP-L systems come in. It's a whole different way of thinking about it. Instead of lines and turns, now we're talking about like points connected on a graph.
Okay, so it's getting a bit more abstract again.
A little bit, yeah. But it's actually super elegant because it allows for these much more complex relationships between those points, which is perfect when you're trying to represent how cells grow and divide, how they interact with each other.
So it's like we're going from drawing the outline of the plant to actually mapping out its internal architecture.
Exactly. And they use this to model some really incredible stuff. Like, I remember reading about fern gamophytes, honestly. Before this book, I had no idea what those even were.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I had to look that one up. But it's fascinating stuff once you get into it.
It really is. And the book walks you through how they used these MAP-L systems to actually model their development, like cell by cell. It's amazing. It's like watching a blueprint of life unfold right in front of you.
It really gives you a whole new appreciation for how much is going on beneath the surface, even in something as seemingly simple as a plant.
Right. It's like this hidden world of complexity. And they've got this great example in the book, the Microsorium linguiform. I might be butchering that name, but
Hey, you're doing better than I could. Yeah, I remember that one.
It's incredible because they don't just show you the final shape, they actually show you every single cell division that leads to it. It's mind-blowing.
It's like they're animating life itself, It's incredible. And throughout the book, there's this recurring theme of fractals, which I always found fascinating.
Yeah.
Because we usually think of fractals as those like trippy mathematical shapes, but they're saying that these patterns, they're actually woven into the very fabric of how plants grow.
Exactly. This is the beautiful example of how math and nature, they intersect in these really unexpected ways. And they're not saying that all plants are like perfect fractals, but many of them, they exhibit that same kind of self-similarity, where a small part resembles the whole.
Right. Like with those Romanesco broccoli, how those little buds, they're like mini versions of the whole head.
Exactly. And they even analyze like a simple branching structure in the book and show how it can be mathematically represented as a fractal. And that's a really crucial point because this connection between these L systems and fractals, it reveals this hidden layer of order, this mathematical elegance in the way that plants grow. It's really quite profound when you think about it.
It's like they're speaking the secret language of math, and this book is like giving us the translation.
Exactly. It's like cracking the code of nature.
It really is. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the algorithmic beauty of plants, what would you say is the big takeaway for our listeners? Like, why should they care about these L systems, these mathematical models of plant growth? What's the so what?
Well, I mean, on one level, it's just awe-inspiring, right? Just seeing how even the most intricate forms of nature, there's this underlying order, this set of rules that governs their creation. But it goes beyond it, I think, because understanding these L systems, this mathematical language of plants, it could revolutionize so many different fields.
It's not just about understanding how a fern unfurls its leaves. It's about like applying that knowledge to real-world problems.
Exactly. Imagine what we could do in agriculture if we truly understood the algorithms of growth. Could we design more resilient crops, more efficient crops? What about new bio-inspired materials based on these plant
It
structures?
really makes you think.
It does. This book, it opens up a world of possibilities.
It's a great reminder that the more we learn about the natural world, the more we realize how much more there is to discover. Well, folks, that's a wrap on our deep dive into The Algorithmic Beauty of Plants, a book that, let's be honest, might just change the way you look at the world around you. Thanks for joining us.